So now I'm going to talk about how to implement adult learning principles when you're delivering a course, whether it's an online training course or an instructor-led training. So by this time, hopefully you have designed your course and with the end in mind, such that you've identified objectives, you've created content, and that are intended to achieve your assessment, that you've linked to your course objectives. So it's at this point where you're trying to deliver your course, again, either through an instructor-led training class or in an online format. As an online training course. When you are delivering, what you want to do, whether it's in person or online, is you want to integrate adult learning. You can do this in an instructor-led training class by integrating active learning techniques. If it's an online course, what you can do is make sure that you provide, as much as possible, scenarios for your content. So, active learning. Those techniques include anything from case studies to role-playing, perhaps a debate or a mind map. You can use emerging technologies such as polling software to play games and get people engaged. Really effective ways of integrating adult learning is to have students teach back to you what is it that they learned from your course. So active learning techniques are ways that you can facilitate the learning process in a way where it engages students if it's an instructor-led course. If it's an online training course, you can provide scenarios, but what in essence you're doing is using, for example, games as a technique to bring out learning in a way that's interactive. If it's an ongoing course, you can use blogs, you can use wikis, or discussion boards as ways of getting people to work with the content. You can even, especially in an online format, integrate video. So some of the more effective online training courses we've developed actually gets away from putting so much text on the screen and gets into bringing people into the scenario as if in, for example, a game. So some of the games I've created, for example, have a door and there's some things blocking the door, and I always ask one of these questions: whether people can explain what's happening in the scenario, interpret, perhaps a symbol, like so for example, I might have a table with a chemical on it, and that chemical has a kind of symbol, and they need to explain what that symbol means. You can apply some principles of chemistry to determine whether the chemical is hazardous. They can develop perspective. We ask them in a scenario to develop perspective of the perhaps inspector who's coming into this room, which has a puddle of water, some things blocking the door, and some unknown chemical on a table, and have them share what it is that the inspector would say about that environment. Perhaps you can ask them in your scenario to empathize with the individual who's about to walk through the door and get injured because there is something blocking his way without proper notification or proper clearance. Or you can have individuals in your scenario in an online training environment reflect on what it would be like to be the owner or manager or principal investigator or faculty member of the environment and seeing their environment just like this. So when you're developing an instructor-led training class or an online training course and it's been assembled in a way that sequences both your content as well as your assessment and maybe perhaps information, you want to integrate adult learning principles by using active learning and scenarios to guide the content development. In essence, what you're trying to do at this point is encourage the use of andragogy, which is a fancy word that speaks to the development of learning, which is different than what is often done in some of the classes, which is a focus on pedagogy, which is in essence primarily worried about what the teacher does and the teaching experience. So one is all about the learner and their experience, and the other is about teaching. One of my favorite philosophers named Paulo Freire said that traditional pedagogy is a lot like treating students as if they were vessels to be filled up with information, like a piggy bank. And the information, whatever it is what we think is important for them to know. This is what he referred to as the banking concept of education. Malcolm Knowles, who is considered the father of adult learning, said that instead of traditional pedagogy, where in essence the teacher is at the head and the students are kind of at the bottom of, in a sense, what is a pyramid kind of a shape of distribution of learning. And you can even see this sometimes in classrooms with tables that are centered in rows facing the teacher. Instead of doing that, let's conceive of students as if they were people who came with some knowledge already, and therefore your role is much less of a traditional teacher and more of a facilitator of knowledge. So instead of a top-down approach, try to use the opportunity in a course setting to integrate learning that is collaborative, that there is an opportunity to co-create instead of fill people with information. So, in order to get away from filling people with information or traditional pedagogy, try to institute adult learning or andragogy by integrating active learning and scenarios in the delivery of your instructor-led training class or your online training course. So in summary, integrate adult learning principles in the implementation of your training course.